Commander Marcus Chun had exactly 3 seconds to make a decision that would change the course of galactic history. And he spent 2 of those seconds thinking about his morning coffee, the Valkyrie. Ceremonial hall stretched before him like something out of a fever dream. All crystalline walls and floating light orbs and aliens that looked like someone had combined a praying mantis with a fashion model and then covered the whole thing in scales that shifted color with every movement. He had been standing at the back of the human delegation, trying very hard to look diplomatic and not at all like a man who had slept 4 hours and survived on caffeine and spite. The ceremony itself was some kind of trade agreement ritual, and Marcus had stopped paying attention approximately 15 minutes ago when he realized that the Valkyrie High Priest was going to chant for at least another hour. That was when he noticed the flame, the sacred brazier of eternal binding, sat at the center of the chamber, a towering structure of black metal and blue fire that the Valkyrie had been maintaining for what they claimed was 6,000 years. Marcus did not care about its history. What he cared about was the fact that Ambassador Eulith, the chief Valkyrie diplomat, had stepped too close to the brazier while gesturing dramatically during her speech, and her ceremonial robes were now approximately 3 inches from catching fire. The fabric was some kind of gossamer material that looked incredibly flammable, and the ambassador seemed completely unaware of the danger because she was too busy making important political points. Marcus looked around the room for someone to alert, but every single being present was focused on the ceremony with an intensity that suggested interrupting would be considered extremely rude at best and a declaration of war at worst. The flame flickered higher. Ambassador Eulith's robes drifted closer. Marcus did the only thing that made sense to him in that moment. He grabbed his coffee cup, crossed the ceremonial space in 5 long strides, and threw the entire contents directly onto the sacred brazier of eternal binding. The fire went out with a hiss that sounded almost like a scream. The room went silent in a way that Marcus had only ever experienced once before, and that had been right before his ex-wife threw her wedding ring at his head. Ambassador Eulith stared at him with all 4 of her eyes wide open. The high priest made a sound that might have been a gasp or might have been the beginning of a heart attack. And Commander Marcus Chun stood there holding an empty coffee cup, covered in ceremonial ash, surrounded by approximately 200 aliens who looked like they were trying to decide whether to scream or faint. The ambassador's robes were about to catch fire. He said into the silence, as if that explained everything. It did not. Apparently, explain anything. The next several hours were a blur of shouting and translation difficulties and what Marcus was pretty sure were death threats delivered in at least 3 different languages. He was separated from the rest of the human delegation and placed in a holding room that was either a prison cell or a very minimalist guest suite, depending on how optimistic he wanted to be about his immediate future. A young Valkyrie officer came to bring him water and information, though she seemed terrified to be in the same room as him. "You have been summoned before the Queen," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is that good or bad?" Marcus asked. "No one has been summoned before Queen Sethnevex for personal judgment in 40 years, the officer replied. "The last one who was summoned did not survive the experience." "So bad then?" "Very bad. Human. Very, very bad." Marcus nodded slowly and drank his water and tried to figure out how exactly he was going to explain to his superiors that he had started an intergalactic incident, because he was worried about fire safety. The escort arrived an hour later. 12 Valkyrie roll guards, each one standing at least 7 feet tall with armor that seemed to absorb light and weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. They did not speak to him as they led him through corridors that twisted and turned in ways that made him dizzy. past windows that looked out onto alien skies and doorways that seemed to lead to impossible spaces. The throne room was the most terrifying and beautiful place Marcus had ever seen. It was massive, easily the size of a football stadium, with ceilings that disappeared into darkness and walls covered in what looked like living murals that shifted and changed as he watched thousands of Valkyrie fill the space. All of them silent, all of them staring at him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to outright hatred. And at the far end, on a throne that seemed to be carved from a single massive crystal, sat Queen Sethanivex. She was 8 feet tall even while seated, her body a perfect blend of elegant and dangerous. Covered in scales that shifted through colors he did not have names for, her crown was made of her own bioluminescent tendrils, and they pulsed with a deep crimson light that seemed to pulse in time with an angry heartbeat. Her eyes, all 6 of them, fixed on Marcus as he was brought before her and forced to his knees. Commander Marcus Chun of Earth. A voice filled the entire chamber without seeming to rise above a normal speaking volume. You stand accused of the destruction of the sacred flame of eternal binding, a relic that has burned without interruption for 6,000 years. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but the queen continued, You have committed an act of sacrilege that my people consider unforgivable. An insult to our ancestors and our gods and everything we hold sacred. The crowd murmured in agreement. And you did this. The queen leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, with a cup of coffee. It was actually pretty good coffee, Marcus heard himself say. Ethiopian blend. If that matters. The silence that followed was so complete that he could hear his own heartbeat. Queen Sethanivex stared at him for a long moment. And then she did something that shocked every single person in that room. She laughed. It was not a kind laugh. Exactly. More like the laugh of someone who could not quite believe what they were hearing. But it was definitely a laugh. Bring him closer, she commanded. Rising from her throne, I want to see this human up close. This strange creature who destroys ancient relics and then makes jokes about his choice of beverage. The guards pushed Marcus forward until he stood at the base of the throne, close enough to see the individual scales on the queen's face, close enough to notice that her secondary eyes, the smaller pair beneath her main ones, were watching him with something that looked almost like curiosity. Tell me, Commander Chan, she said, descending the steps until she stood directly before him, towering over him like a beautiful nightmare. Do you have any idea what you have done? Marcus looked up at her and said the only honest thing he could think of. I prevented a fire hazard. Your Majesty, that is all I know for certain. The queen's tendrils flared brighter, and Marcus prepared himself for whatever came next. Queen Sethanivex circled Marcus. Chun the way a shark might circle something it found interesting but had not yet decided to eat. The entire throne room watched in breathless silence as their immortal ruler examined the human from every angle. Her tendrils pulsing with colors that shifted between angry crimson and something more complex that Marcus could not identify. You are smaller than I expected, she said finally, stopping in front of him. Your species has a reputation for recklessness that I assumed would come with greater physical presence. We make up for size with bad decisions. Marcus replied. The queen tilted her head, a gesture that seemed almost bird-like despite her reptilian appearance. You continue to make jokes, even now. Even standing before a being who could order your execution with a single word. I find humor helps with stress. Your Majesty, does it help with death? I guess I will find out. Something flickered in the queen's expression. Something that looked almost like respect buried beneath layers of royal composure. She turned to address the crowd, her voice carrying effortlessly through the massive chamber. Leave us. The reaction was immediate and dramatic. The high priest stepped forward, his ancient face twisted with outrage. My queen, this human has committed the greatest act of sacrilege in 6 millennia. He must face public judgment. He must be made an example of. The ancestors demand. The ancestors, Sethanevex interrupted, her voice suddenly cold enough to freeze the air itself. Speak through me, not through you, High Priest? And I have not heard them demand anything yet. She turned those 6 eyes back to Marcus, and he could have sworn he saw amusement in them. I will question this human alone. I will determine the truth of what happened and why, and then I will decide his fate. Is that understood? It was clearly not a question. The throne room emptied in minutes. Thousands of Velkari filing out in perfect silence, casting glances at Marcus that ranged from pity to hatred to something that looked almost like envy. Soon only the queen and the human remained. The massive chamber feeling somehow even larger. Now that it was empty, Sithnet seemed to relax slightly once they were alone. The rigid formality of royal performance softening into something more natural. She descended the rest of the steps and gestured toward a smaller throne that Marcus had not noticed before. One that sat at ground level near a series of what looked like meditation pools. Sit, she commanded, settling onto the smaller throne herself. We are going to have an actual conversation, Commander Chum. One without the performance of court politics. Marcus sat, grateful to be off his knees, and waited. Tell me exactly what happened, the queen said. Tell me what you saw and what you thought and why you chose to act as you did. So Marcus told her. He explained about standing at the back of the delegation, about noticing the ambassador's robes drifting too close to the flame, about the way the fabric had seemed to shimmer with flammability, about his calculation that he had approximately 3 seconds to prevent what could have been a serious injury, or worse. I looked around for someone to alert, he said, but everyone was so focused on the ceremony that I knew by the time I got anyone's attention, it would be too late. So you threw your coffee at our most sacred artifact. It was the only liquid I had on me. The queen studied him for a long moment, those secondary eyes of hers seeming to peer directly into his soul. This instinct, she said slowly, this willingness to act without calculation, without considering the consequences to yourself, is this common among your species? Marcus thought about the question carefully. Some of us are like this, he admitted. Not everyone, but some. We see something wrong and we react before we think. It gets us into trouble more often than not. I imagine it does, the queen said. But her tone had shifted to something warmer. Tell me about this trouble you have found yourself in before. And so Marcus found himself telling the queen of the Velkari hegemony about his life. He told her about growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone and problems were solved by neighbors helping. Neighbors. He told her about joining the military because he wanted to help people and did not know any other way to do it. Told her about the fire. There was a building, he said, his voice quieter now. An apartment complex, old construction. Went up like kindling when the electrical system failed. The fire department was on its way, but they were still 3 minutes out. What did you do? The queen asked. Leaning forward, there was a kid on the 3rd floor. I could see her in the window. She was screaming. And everyone was just standing there, waiting for the professionals to arrive. But you did not wait. No, Marcus said. I did not wait. I went in. I found her. I got her out. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital afterward with burns on my arms and back. But she was okay. She was alive. The queen was silent for a moment, processing this. And your pair bond, she said. Your wife. She was not pleased by this heroism. Marcus laughed. But it was not a happy sound. It was our anniversary, he said. I was supposed to be at a restaurant across town. I was supposed to be celebrating 5 years of marriage. Instead, I was running into a burning building because I could not just stand there and watch a child die. And she ended your bond because of this. She said I cared more about being a hero than I cared about being a husband. She said I would always choose the stranger who needed saving over the family waiting at home. She said she could not live her life, wondering if this would be the day I did not come back. The Queen considered this for a long time. She was not wrong, Sethanovex said finally. Was she? No, Marcus admitted. She was not wrong. I would do it again. I would make the same choice every single time. And she knew that, and she could not live with it. And I could not blame her for that. The Queen rose from her throne and walked to one of the meditation pools. Staring down at the glowing water, "My people live for centuries," she said. Her back to Marcus. "I myself have ruled for 247 years. In that time, I have seen countless acts of what my advisors call bravery and what my philosophers call foolishness." She turned to face him. "But I do not think I have ever encountered a species quite like yours, Commander Chun, a species that values the act of helping above the calculation of cost. A species that will run into fire because a stranger is screaming. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Your Majesty," the Queen smiled, an expression that involved her mandibles clicking together in a way that Marcus found oddly charming. "I have not decided yet," she said, "but I find myself increasingly curious to learn more." She approached him again, and this time there was no circling, no predatory assessment. Just a direct approach that felt almost like one equal meeting another. "Tell me, Commander Chun," she said, "this wife who left you, did you love her?" "Yes," Marcus said. "I still do in a way. But some loves are not meant to last forever. Some loves are meant to teach you something and then let you go." "And what did this love teach you?" Marcus met her 6 eyes with his 2 and spoke honestly. "It taught me that I cannot be something I am not, even for someone I care about. It taught me that the right choice is not always the easy choice. And it taught me that being alone is better than being with someone who needs you to become smaller." The Queen's tendrils shifted to that complex color again, the one Marcus could not identify, and she nodded slowly. "You are a fascinating creature, Commander Chun," she said. "I believe we have much more to discuss." The meditation pools cast strange shadows across the empty throne room as Queen Sethanovex paced before Marcus Chun, her tendrils shifting through colors he was beginning to recognize as signs of deep thought. "What I am about to tell you," she said finally, "has not been spoken aloud outside of the royal bloodline for 6,000 years." Marcus stayed quiet and waited, the sacred flame of eternal binding. The Queen continued. "Was not a religious artifact, not truly. It was a prison." She stopped pacing and turned to face him. "My great-grandmother, Queen Vethari the Conqueror, ruled the Velkari for 300 years before her physical form failed. But she was too powerful, too stubborn, too hungry for control to simply die and move on." "What did she do?" Marcus asked. "She discovered a way to bind her consciousness to fire itself, to exist as pure energy and thought contained within a flame. She believed this would allow her to guide and advise her descendants forever, to ensure that her vision for the Velkari would never fade." The Queen laughed bitterly. What she actually did was create a nightmare that has haunted every queen since her supposed death. She walked to one of the pools and stared into its depths as if she could see the past reflected there. Vethari was not a good ruler. Commander Chun, she was brilliant and powerful, and utterly without mercy. She conquered 37 systems, not because her people needed the resources, but because she enjoyed the conquest. She developed weapons that are still banned by galactic law. She experimented on prisoners of war in ways that I will not describe to you because some horrors do not need to be shared. And she has been watching your people for 6,000 years, Marcus said slowly. "Beginning to understand watching and whispering," the Queen confirmed. The flame allowed her consciousness to reach into the dreams of anyone who came too close. She could not control us directly, but she could influence, suggest, corrupt. Sethanovex turned to face him again. and Marcus saw something in her eyes that he recognized. The exhaustion of someone carrying a burden too heavy for any single person. 3 of my predecessors went mad from her whispers. One launched a war that killed millions because Vethri convinced her in dreams that our neighbors were plotting invasion. Another became so paranoid that she executed her own children, believing them to be assassins sent by enemies that did not exist. Why did no one put out the flame before now? Marcus asked. The queen made a sound that might have been a sigh, because the binding went both ways. If the flame was extinguished by a Velkari, by anyone whose mind Vethri could reach, she would have been released, not destroyed. Her consciousness would have been free to seek a new host, a new vessel. She would have possessed whoever ended the flame and used their body to continue her reign. But I am not Velkari. No. Commander Chun, you are not. The queen's tendrils shifted to gold, a color Marcus had not seen before. Your mind is close to her. Your thoughts are your own. When you threw your coffee onto that flame, you did not just extinguish it. You destroyed her completely and permanently. Marcus sat with this information for a long moment. So I accidentally saved your people from an ancient evil by trying to prevent a wardrobe malfunction. That is perhaps the most human way to describe the situation. Yes, and the crowd out there, the high priest who wanted me executed, they do not know any of this. They know what they have been told for 6,000 years, that the flame was sacred, that it honored our ancestors, that its destruction would bring catastrophe. The queen shook her head. The truth was hidden because we feared what would happen if Vethri learned we were looking for a way to destroy her. She could hear everything that happened near the flame, every prayer, every ceremony, every whispered secret. That sounds exhausting, Marcus said. Having to pretend to worship something you actually feared. The queen laughed. And this time it was a genuine laugh, warm and surprised. You have a talent for understatement. Commander Chun, it has been more than exhausting. It has been a burden passed from mother to daughter for generations. Each of us knowing the truth, each of us searching for a solution. None of us finding one. She crossed the space between them and did something that shocked Marcus even more than learning about the ancient evil queen. She sat down beside him. Not on a throne, not elevated above him, but right next to him on the same level. I have been queen for 247 years, she said quietly. And I have spent every single night of those years with one eye on the flame, wondering if tonight would be the night Vethri finally found a way past my mental defenses. Wondering if I would wake up as myself or as a puppet for a monster wearing my face. That sounds lonely, Marcus said. The queen looked at him with something approaching wonder. Of all the things you could say in response to learning that you accidentally destroyed an ancient horror, you comment on my loneliness. The horror is gone, Marcus said simply. Your loneliness is still here. Seems like the more important thing to address. The queen's tendrils pulsed through several colors in rapid succession, and Marcus got the impression that she was experiencing emotions she had not felt in a very long time. Your species fascinates me, she said finally. You throw coffee at problems and then ask if the immortal ruler is doing okay emotionally. Is that a complaint? No. Commander Chun, it is very much not a complaint. They sat in silence for a moment, and Marcus realized that for the first time since being dragged into this throne room, he was not afraid the queen beside him was not a terrifying alien monarch preparing to execute him. She was a woman who had carried an impossible burden for longer than his entire species had been traveling between stars. And she was finally free of it. What happens now? He asked. To me, I mean. Your people still think I committed some kind of horrible sacrilege. The queen nodded slowly, her expression shifting to something more calculating. There will need to be consequences, at least publicly. My people will demand justice for what they believe was a crime against our ancestors. So, I will be executed after all. Do not be dramatic. Commander Chun, execution is far too permanent for someone who just solved a 6,000-year-old problem. She rose and began pacing again. But this time, it was the pace of someone working through a solution rather than circling prey. I will sentence you to confinement within the royal compound. Officially, this will be imprisonment, a sign to my people that the sacrilege has been punished. Unofficially, it will give us time. Time for what? The queen stopped and looked at him with those 6 eyes that seemed to see far more than they should. Time to learn more about your species and why it produces individuals like you. Time to develop better relations between our peoples. Time to prepare my court for the eventual revelation that you did not destroy something sacred, but rather freed us from something terrible. And how long will this confinement last? 1 lunar cycle. Approximately 30 of your Earth days. Marcus nodded slowly, calculating his options and finding that he had exactly none. I assume I do not have a choice in this matter. The queen smiled that mandible-clicking smile again. You do not. But I suspect you will find the experience less unpleasant than you expect. Commander Chun, the royal compound has many amenities, and I am told that humans require regular feeding and entertainment to maintain their well-being. We do generally appreciate those things. Yes, then you shall have them, and you shall have something else as well. She leaned closer, and Marcus caught a scent like ozone and flowers. You shall have my company, Commander Chun, for I find that I have questions about your species, and you seem uniquely qualified to answer them. Marcus met her gaze and tried to decide if he was being threatened or flirted with given the circumstances. He suspected it might be both. The public judgment of Commander Marcus Chen took place 3 days later in the same throne room where he had first been dragged before the queen. This time, the room felt different. The crowd was still there. Thousands of Velkari filling every available space, their compound eyes fixed on the human standing before the elevated throne. But Marcus knew something they did not. And that knowledge changed everything. Queen Sethnivx sat upon her crystal throne in full royal regalia. Her tendrils arranged in a formal crown pattern that pulsed with deep purple light. Her scales polished to a mirror shine that reflected the floating light orbs. She looked every inch the terrifying, immortal ruler. And Marcus had to remind himself that she had sat beside him 3 days ago and asked about his favorite. Earth foods, Commander Marcus. Chun of the United Earth Alliance. Her voice rang through the chamber with cold authority. You stand before this court accused of the destruction of the sacred flame of eternal binding. How do you answer these charges? I did what I believed was necessary to prevent harm. Your Majesty, Marcus said, I accept responsibility for my actions and their consequences. The crowd murmured, and Marcus could hear both approval and disapproval in the sound. The high priest stepped forward, his ancient face twisted with barely contained fury. The human admits his crime. Your Majesty, tradition demands execution. The ancestors cry out for vengeance. We cannot allow this sacrilege to go unpunished. The queen raised one elegant hand, and the high priest fell silent immediately. I am aware of what tradition demands, High Priest. I am also aware that tradition does not account for every possible circumstance. She rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood at Marcus's level, close enough that he could see the subtle patterns in her scales. Commander Chen acted without malice, she announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. He acted out of concern for Ambassador Eulith, whose ceremonial robes were in danger of catching fire. His intentions were protective, not destructive. The crowd's murmuring grew louder. However, the queen continued, intentions do not erase consequences. The sacred flame is gone, and the Velkari people deserve to see justice done. She turned to face Marcus directly, and he saw something in her secondary eyes that looked almost like an apology. Commander Marcus Chun, I sentence you to confinement within the royal compound for 1 lunar cycle. During this time, you will serve as my personal cultural liaison, educating me and my court on human customs, perspectives, and decision-making processes." The high priest sputtered with outrage. "Your Majesty, this is hardly punishment. You are rewarding him with proximity to the throne. I am removing him from his duties and his people." The queen replied coolly, "I am stripping him of his military function and reducing him to the status of a teacher. For a warrior, this is humiliation. For his superiors, this is an embarrassment." She looked at Marcus with those 6 calculating eyes. "Is this not accurate? Commander Chun, would your people not see this as a demotion? A punishment?" Marcus understood what she was doing. Giving him a role to play in this public performance. "Yes, Your Majesty," he said, trying to sound appropriately defeated. "This would be seen as a serious mark against my career. My commanders will not be pleased." The crowd seemed somewhat satisfied by this, and the high priest, while clearly unhappy, did not continue his objections. "Then it is settled," the queen announced. Returning to her throne, Commander Chun will begin his duties immediately. This court is dismissed. The crowd filed out slowly, many of them casting curious glances at the human who had somehow survived royal judgment. And within an hour, Marcus found himself being escorted, not to a prison cell, but to a suite of rooms in the royal compound that were larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. The walls were made of something that looked like pearl and something that looked like crystal, and the furniture was clearly designed for beings much larger than humans, but had been hastily modified with cushions and platforms to accommodate his size. A young Valkyrie servant entered behind him, her scales a soft green that seemed to indicate youth. "I am Bethany," she said, bowing slightly. "I have been assigned to attend to your needs during your confinement." "Commander Chun." "Marcus," he said automatically. "Just Marcus is fine." Bethany looked shocked by this informality, but nodded slowly. "Marcus," she repeated, as if testing the word. "Is there anything you require?" "Information would be nice," Marcus said. "I know I am supposed to be a cultural liaison, but I have no idea what that actually means in practice." The servant smiled, showing teeth that were sharper than Marcus had expected. "It means you will be spending a great deal of time with the queen. Marcus, she has requested that you join her for the evening meal each night, and she has cleared her schedule for personal instruction in human culture each afternoon." Marcus blinked. Every day for the full lunar cycle. Yes. The queen was very specific about this. Marcus sat down on one of the modified chairs and tried to process what was happening. He had thrown coffee at an alien artifact, accidentally destroyed an ancient evil, and was now apparently going to be spending his imprisonment having dinner with the most powerful being in the Valkyrie hegemony every single night. His ex-wife had always said he had a talent for stumbling into strange situations. The first dinner was that very evening. Marcus was escorted to a private dining chamber that was small by Valkyrie standards, which meant it was only about the size of a tennis court, and found Queen Sethnivex already waiting for him. She had changed from her formal regalia into something simpler, flowing robes that shifted color with her movements, and her tendrils hung loose around her shoulders rather than being arranged in a crown. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to a chair that had been clearly designed for a human. "I have had my chefs research Earth cuisine, though I apologize in advance if they have made errors." Marcus sat and found himself facing a meal that included what looked like steak and what looked like mashed potatoes and what looked like some kind of vegetable medley, all arranged on plates made of that same pearlescent material. "This is incredible," he said honestly. "How did you manage this on 3 days' notice?" "I am the queen," Sethnivex replied with what might have been a smile. Resources tend to appear when I require them. They ate in companionable silence for a while, and Marcus was surprised to find that the food was actually quite good. Not exactly like Earth food, but close enough to be comforting. "I have been thinking about what you told me," the Queen said eventually. "About your instinct to act without calculation. About your willingness to accept consequences for choices you believed were right. And what have you concluded?" "I have concluded that your species is either going to save the galaxy or destroy it. Possibly both simultaneously." Marcus laughed. "That sounds about right, actually." The Queen leaned forward, her secondary eyes fixed on him with that intensity he was beginning to recognize as genuine curiosity. "Tell me about human relationships," she said. "Tell me about your pair bonds and how they form and why they sometimes fail. That is a big topic. We have 30 nights." "Commander Chun, I believe we can cover a great deal of ground." And so Marcus began to explain, starting with the basics of human courtship and moving through the complexities of marriage and divorce and everything in between. The Queen listened with rapt attention, asking questions that were sometimes naive and sometimes so perceptive that Marcus felt exposed. "This concept of romantic love," she said during their third evening together, "it seems inefficient. You bond to individuals based on emotional response rather than practical compatibility. That is one way to look at it. But you persist in this practice despite the high failure rate of such bonds." "We do. Why?" Marcus thought about it for a long moment. "Because when it works, there is nothing else like it. Because the feeling of being known and accepted by another person is worth the risk of being hurt. Because humans are not built to be practical about love." The Queen's tendrils shifted to that gold collar again, and she looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "Your species takes extraordinary risks for emotional rewards. We really do. I find this." She paused, searching for the right word. "Compelling." Marcus met her 6 eyes with his 2 and felt something shift in the air between them. Something that had been building since that first conversation in the empty throne room. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "are we still talking about human relationships in general? Or are we talking about something more specific?" The Queen smiled, and this time there was nothing predatory about it. "You are perceptive, Commander Chun. More perceptive than I gave you credit for." She rose from her chair and walked to the window that looked out over the alien city below. "I am 273 years old," she said quietly. "I have been queen for 247 of those years. I have never had a partner. Never allowed anyone close enough to see past the crown. Why not? Because Vethry was always watching, always whispering, always searching for weakness she could exploit. I could not risk letting anyone into my heart when my own mind was a battleground." She turned to face him. "But Vethry is gone now, thanks to you and your coffee. And I find myself wondering what it might be like to actually live rather than simply survive." Marcus stood and crossed the room to stand beside her. "And you are wondering this about me?" The lunar cycle that followed became the subject of legends that would be told throughout Valkyrie's space for generations to come. Commander Marcus Chun proved to be unlike any diplomat the royal court had ever encountered, mostly because he was not a diplomat at all and refused to pretend otherwise. During his second week of confinement, he accidentally started a new holiday tradition by misunderstanding a funeral ritual and bringing dessert to what was supposed to be a somber occasion of fasting. The Valkyrie had never considered combining mourning with cake before, and after much debate, they decided they actually preferred it that way by the 3rd week. Marcus had taught the Royal Guard how to play poker. This resulted in the first recorded instance of Valkyrie gambling addiction. 3 formal complaints from their families, and 1 guard who won enough credits from his fellows to buy his own small transport ship. The Queen found the whole situation hilarious and refused to intervene, but it was the trade dispute that truly cemented Marcus's reputation to merchant. Clans had been fighting over shipping rights to a particular asteroid belt for 217 years, complete with formal protests, legal challenges, and what the Velkari called honor skirmishes, but what Marcus called piracy. He was brought in as a neutral observer since he had no understanding of Velkari politics and therefore could not possibly favor either side. After listening to both clans argue for 4 hours, Marcus had reached his limit. "This is ridiculous," he announced, standing up from his observer's chair. "You are fighting over rocks in space. There are literally infinite rocks in space." Both clan leaders stared at him in shock. "Split the asteroid belt in half," Marcus continued. "Draw a line down the middle, one side for each of you, and stop wasting everyone's time with this nonsense." "But the honor of our ancestors demands," one leader began. "Your ancestors are dead," Marcus interrupted. "And I'm pretty sure they would rather you spent your energy making money than fighting over imaginary insults from 2 centuries ago." The room went very quiet, and then, to everyone's amazement, including his own, both clan leaders agreed. The trade dispute that had lasted longer than most human nations was settled in under 5 minutes. Queen Sethnavex laughed for nearly an hour when she heard the news. "You just solved the problem my court has been mediating for over 2 centuries by telling everyone involved to stop being ridiculous," she said during their dinner that night. "It worked, though. It worked spectacularly. And now half my court thinks you are a genius and the other half thinks you are dangerously insane. What do you think?" The queen reached across the table and took his hand, a gesture she had learned from him during one of their many conversations about human customs. "I think you are exactly what this court needed, and exactly what I needed, even if I did not know it until you threw coffee at my ancestors." Their evenings together had shifted over the course of the month from formal dinners to something much more intimate. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their very different lives. Sethani told him about the burden of immortal rule, about watching generations of her people live and die while she remained unchanged, about the loneliness of being a creature that everyone feared and no one truly knew. Marcus told her about Earth, about baseball and barbecues and the way rain smelled on hot pavement in summer, about his childhood and his failed marriage and his stubborn refusal to become someone he was not. "You gave up your family for your principles," Sethani observed one night. "That seems like a very human thing to do." "My ex-wife would say I gave up my family for my ego," Marcus replied. "What would you say?" "I would say that I gave up my marriage for a little girl who was trapped in a burning building, and that if I had to make the choice again, I would make the same one. And that perhaps some people are not meant to be married to people like me." The queen was quiet for a moment. "People like you," she repeated. "What kind of person is that?" "The kind who cannot walk past someone in trouble. The kind who acts before thinking. The kind who would rather be hurt than helpless." Sethany's tendrils shifted through several colors before settling on that warm gold that Marcus had come to recognize as affection. "That sounds like someone worth knowing," she said softly. "That sounds like someone worth keeping." The final night of Marcus's confinement arrived far too quickly. He was summoned to the queen's private garden, a bioluminescent paradise hidden in the heart of the palace where flowers sang and vines pulsed with soft light. Sethani stood among the glowing plants looking nervous, which was strange because Marcus had never seen her look nervous about anything. "I have prepared 17 different versions of what I want to say to you," she admitted when he approached. None of them seemed adequate. "Royalty gets nervous too. Royalty gets terrified," she corrected. "We simply hide it behind protocol and formal language." She extended her hand toward him, palm up, a human gesture of openness that she had clearly researched. "Marcus Chen." You extinguished an ancient evil with your morning coffee. You taught my guards to bluff at cards. You solved a 2-century trade dispute by calling everyone ridiculous. And you made me laugh for the first time in 60 years. She stepped closer. I find that I am not ready for you to leave. Marcus took her hand, feeling the cool smoothness of her scales against his skin. Then asked me to stay. Is that how it works? I simply ask. That is exactly how it works. Her tendrils blazed with golden light as she pulled him closer. Stay. Marcus, not as a prisoner, not as a cultural liaison. Stay as whatever we are going to become. I find that I want very much to discover what that might be. Your people might have opinions about their queen courting the man who destroyed their sacred artifact. My people, Sifani said firmly, will learn to adapt. Besides, you freed them from Vetheri's shadow, even if they do not know it yet. Give it time, and they will build statues in your honor. Statues of me throwing coffee at a fire. Statues of you being human. She touched his face gently. It is, I have learned, a remarkable thing to be. She leaned forward until her forehead touched his. An intimate gesture that she had explained was the Valkyrie equivalent of a kiss. I spent 247 years alone because I thought I had to be. Because I thought the crown demanded it. Because I was afraid of what Vetheri might do if I let anyone close. And now I am free. And I am terrified. And I want to be terrified with you. Marcus smiled and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close despite the difference in their heights. I can work with terrified, he said. I have been making decisions while terrified my whole life. 3 years later, the wedding of Queen Sethany Vex to Marcus Chun, first human prince consort of the Valkyrie hegemony, was attended by representatives from 47 different species. The ceremony included no open flames whatsoever. At the reception, the high priest, who had once demanded Marcus's execution, raised a glass of earth, champagne, and offered a toast that would be quoted for centuries to the human who destroyed our most sacred relic, stole our queen's heart, and somehow convinced us all that this was exactly what we needed. May your descendants be as gloriously chaotic as their father. Marcus raised his own glass, to doing the right thing even when it seemed stupid. Sithani wrapped one tendril around his free hand and added her own words, and to giving your digits to the right person. The crowd laughed, though half of them did not understand the joke, as the reception continued around them. Marcus pulled his wife aside and looked up at her with the same honest expression he had worn in that throne room 3 years ago. No regrets, he asked. None, she replied. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The fire he had run into, the marriage he had lost, the coffee he had thrown, the queen he had found. Not a single one. Sithani smiled that mandible-clicking smile he had fallen in love with. Good. Because I believe human custom requires that we now feed each other cake. It does. This seems unhygienic. It absolutely is. Excellent. Let us be unhygienic together. And so they were. For all the years that followed the galaxy, humanity had proven once again would never be boring as long as there were humans in it, ready to throw coffee at problems and accidentally fall in love along the way.